Greetings, night owls and brave listeners. Today we're going to dive into something dark. Something that shouldn't be spoken out loud. But hey, you came here to scare. So here we go.
The town that whispers secrets in the shadows. The train rattled to a stop, and Mike stepped onto the platform, his boots crunching on frost-dusted gravel. Eldridge was a small, unassuming town, its red brick buildings huddled in a valley cradled by jagged hills that loomed like the spine of some ancient beast. At 22, Mike was no stranger to starting over. His childhood was a patchwork of new schools and new faces, each move a step further from the lab explosion that killed his brother, Ethan, 10 years ago. That tragedy, a microbial experiment gone wrong, had left Mike with a burning need to understand the invisible world of microorganisms. Eldridge University, a beacon of cutting-edge research, was his chance to unravel those mysteries. The air was sharp, tinged with a metallic tang, like rust mixed with something sour, and the hills seemed to watch, their shadows pooling like ink in the fading light. The dorm was a 3-story brick monolith, its ivy-covered walls glowing faintly in the dusk. Inside, it buzzed with the chaotic energy of new students, boxes stacked in hallways, laughter spilling from open doors, the smell of burnt popcorn and cheap cologne mingling in the air. A bulletin board sagged under flyers for trivia nights, hiking clubs, and a poetry slam at the local coffee shop. Mike's room on the 3rd floor was a cramped rectangle, for mismatched beds, desks cluttered with textbooks, and a fluorescent light that flickered like a dying pulse. His roommates were already there, carving out their space. Jim, wiry and quiet, sat cross-legged on his bed, sketching a crow with eyes so human they seemed to blink. Kyle, broad-shouldered and loud, was unpacking a duffel bag, his voice booming about a high school track meet where he'd outrun everyone but struck out with the prom queen. Alex, all sharp cheekbones and sharper attitude, leaned against the wall, polishing his boots with a cloth, his eyes flicking to Mike like he was sizing up a rival. The first day was a whirlwind. Orientation was a blur of campus maps, lukewarm coffee, and professors droning about academic rigor while students whispered about weekend plans. In the dining hall, trays clattered as freshmen debated the best bars in town, while a girl with purple hair juggled oranges, her laughter cutting through the noise. The library was a sanctuary of murmurs, with students bent over books or sneaking glances at their phones. Mike felt a flicker of hope, a rare warmth after years of solitude. His roommates were an odd mix, but they clicked. Jim's sketches were haunting, each stroke deliberate, his dry wit sneaking through in quiet moments. Kyle's stories grew wilder with each beer, though he admitted his charm rarely worked on girls. Alex, despite his arrogance, helped Kyle fix a broken desk drawer, muttering about sloppiness but flashing a grin when thanked. That night, sprawled on their beds, the roommates swapped stories. The dorm was alive, music blasted from a room down the hall, footsteps thumped overhead, and someone shouted about a lost phone charger. But the mood shifted when Jim mentioned the fog. Every third night, he said, his pencil pausing mid-stroke, it comes. Stay inside. Kyle chuckled, calling it a prank, but Alex's face hardened, his voice sharp, don't test it. Mike laughed it off, thinking it was a hazing ritual for the new guy. What, like a werewolf story? You're messing with me. Jim stared at his sketch, and Alex's jaw clenched. Mike fell asleep to the dorm's hum, unaware that the hills outside seemed to lean closer, their shadows whispering secrets he wasn't ready to hear. A chill in the air, the first signs of dread. Morning broke over Eldridge, the sun struggling through a haze that clung to the valley. The dorm was a riot of activity, students shouted over lost keys, a microwave beeped incessantly, and someone blasted hip-hop from a cracked speaker. In the dining hall, trays clattered as students wolfed down soggy pancakes, arguing about politics or planning a hike to the hills. A lanky guy named Sam juggled apples, drawing cheers, while a girl with braids, MIA, vented about her roommate snoring, her voice carrying over the din. Mike grabbed a tray, his mind still on the fog warning, though he dismissed it as campus folklore. His microbiology class was a sterile paradise, pipettes, agar plates, the hum of incubators, but Professor Hargrove, a wiry woman with sharp eyes, seemed distracted, her gaze flicking to the windows as if expecting a storm. Jim was in the art studio, his sketches growing darker, jagged lines forming shapes that seemed to writhe. Kyle was at track practice, his laughter echoing as he flirted with a cheerleader who rolled her eyes. Alex strutted through the quad, dodging a group of giggling girls like they were contagious, his polished boots glinting in the weak sunlight. As dusk fell, the campus shifted. The air grew heavy, the hills casting long shadows that seemed to crawl toward the dorm. Students hurried inside, their footsteps quick, their voices hushed. By 8 p.m., a fog rolled in, thick and suffocating, swallowing streetlights and muffling sound. From the dorm window, it looked alive, tendrils curling around lampposts, creeping up the ivy like ghostly fingers. Mike scoffed, but Jim's hands trembled, his sketchbook falling to the floor, the crow's eyes staring up. Kyle, usually loud, was silent, his cigarette unlit, his eyes fixed on the haze. Alex locked the door with a click that echoed like a warning shot. A scream pierced the night, sharp, human, then gone, swallowed by the fog. Mike's stomach twisted, but he clung to logic, dismissing it as a prank, his scientific mind rejecting the supernatural. Curiosity overpowered caution. Ignoring his roommate's protests, Jim's whispered pleas, Alex's sharp glare, Kyle's muttered curses, Mike slipped outside. The fog was a cold shroud, damp and heavy, clinging to his skin like wet silk. The world was reduced to a grey haze, the dorm's lights faint pinpricks behind him. Shapes flickered in the mist, familiar, comforting. Sarah, a girl from his lab with a quick smile, stood ahead, waving him closer. But as he approached, her face warped. Her eyes sank into black pits, glistening like oil, her mouth stretching into a jagged maw, teeth like shattered glass glinting in the dim light. Her skin bubbled, splitting to reveal pulsating flesh beneath, green and oozing, veins throbbing like worms. She lunged, her fingers now claws, nails curling like rusted hooks, her breath a rancid hiss. Mike stumbled back, heart pounding, as another figure emerged, Professor Hargrove, her face melting, skin sloughing off to reveal a skull-like grin, tendrils of flesh writhing like snakes. They didn't just attack, they hunted, dragging a screaming student into the fog, their claws slicing with surgical precision, blood pooling in glittering streaks, their laughter a guttural rasp that echoed in Mike's skull. He ran, heart hammering, the dorm's lights a beacon. Inside, his roommates' faces were grim. "Told you," Alex muttered, his hands shaking despite his bravado. Jim whispered, "They're not human anymore." Kyle, ashen, confessed he'd seen his coach in the fog last semester, transformed into something that tore a stray dog apart, its jaws unhinging to reveal rows of needle-like teeth, its eyes glowing with malice. The dorm was a fortress now, students piled furniture against doors, their whispers filled with fear of missing friends. Mike's skepticism cracked. Those creatures weren't hallucinations, they were real, wearing faces he knew. The dorm's vibrancy, its laughter, its chaos, felt like a thin veil over something sinister. Eldridge was hiding a nightmare, and Mike needed answers. Unearthing the darkness, secrets in the stacks. The next morning, Eldridge was subdued, the fog shadow lingering like a bruise. The dorm hummed with nervous energy, students whispered about missing friends, their eyes darting to the windows. In the dining hall, MIA sobbed, saying her roommate, Lily, hadn't returned after the fog. A group of seniors debated fleeing town, their coffee growing cold, their voices low. Mike's microbiology class was tense. Hargrove was absent, replaced by Tim, a nervous grad student who fumbled through the lecture, avoiding questions about the lab's restricted wing, his hand shaking as he clutched a pen. Jim was in the common room, his sketches now frantic, one depicting a creature with hollow eyes that seemed to watch Mike. Kyle, his bravado gone, smoked by the window, muttering about his coach, his hands trembling. Alex was too calm, organizing supplies, flashlights, a crowbar, with a precision that felt military, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of fear. Mike's scientific mind refused to accept superstition. He headed to the library, a gothic maze of oak shelves and stained glass windows that cast eerie patterns on the floor. The air was thick with dust and the faint scent of old leather, the silence broken only by the rustle of pages and the occasional cough. Mike dug through archives, finding articles on Eldridge University's microbial research, dense reports on behavioral modification in extreme environments, funded by shadowy grants. One article mentioned test subjects and controlled environmental releases, but key details were redacted, the black ink-like scars across the page. Mike's heart raced. His brother's accident, a lab explosion involving rogue microbes, echoed in those words. Was Eldridge hiding the same sins? Back in the dorm, the atmosphere was heavy. A girl named Rachel organized a vigil for the missing, her voice trembling as she lit candles in the common room. Students gathered, some praying, others staring blankly, their faces pale. Mike confronted his roommates that night, the room lit by a single flickering bulb. Jim, pale, admitted he'd overheard professors discussing test subjects in the fog, his sketches a way to process the horror. Kyle, voice cracking, confessed his coach, a former prisoner, had volunteered for experiments, now a monster with unhinged jaws and claw-like hands. Alex, after a long pause, revealed he'd seen files in his uncle's office, donor privileges, detailing the fog as microbial waste, released to test mutated subjects. The creatures were humans, criminals infected with engineered microbes that twisted their bodies, making them mimic familiar faces to lure victims. The fog, laced with these microbes, triggered illusions, drawing people into the open. Mike's blood ran cold, his brother's death felt too similar, a ghost linking his past to Eldridge's horrors. The dorm's life, its parties, its chatter, felt like a lie, a fragile mask over a nightmare. Trust shattered, friends or traitors. The next fog was due tomorrow, and the dorm was a pressure cooker. Students barricaded windows with desks, their faces pale, some whispering prayers, others packing bags to flee. The town felt like it was holding its breath, the hills casting shadows that seemed to pulse. Mike noticed Jim's sketches growing more frantic, one depicting a creature with Alex's sharp cheekbones, its eyes too real, glinting with malice. Kyle was chain-smoking, muttering about his coach, his hands trembling as ash fell to the floor. Alex was too composed, organizing supplies, knives, a flashlight, a crowbar, like a general preparing for war, but his eyes darted nervously, betraying his calm. Mike's suspicion grew. Were his roommates hiding something? Late that night, Mike followed Alex to the basement, navigating a maze of laundry machines and flickering lights. He caught him slipping into a locked storage room, the door marked with a university seal. Inside, Alex was rifling through files, reports on subject behavior and fog dispersal protocols, stamped with warnings. Confronted, Alex's composure cracked. He admitted his uncle, a major donor, was funding the experiments, and he'd stayed silent, hoping to protect his friends. "I didn't sign up for this," he snapped, but his guilt was palpable, his hand shaking as he clutched a file. Mike pressed Jim later, and the quiet artist broke down, confessing he'd been paid to monitor students, reporting who went out during the fog. His sketches were a way to process the shame, each creature a reflection of his guilt. Kyle, when confronted, exploded with anger. He'd suspected his coach's fate and had been feeding the scientists false data, hoping to sabotage their work, his bravado a mask for his fear. The fog came again, and the dawn turned into a war zone. Creatures pounded on doors, their warped faces mimicking students Mike knew, Sam, MIA, even Tim, the TA. One, resembling Sam, had a mouth that split its head in two, teeth gnashing like a saw as it tore through a barricade, its limbs twitching unnaturally, oozing black ichor that smelled of decay. Mike, Alex, and Jim fought to survive, wielding makeshift weapons, chair legs, a fire extinguisher, a broken lamp. But trust was shattered. Kyle died saving Jim, his body ripped apart by a creature wearing his coach's face, its limbs stretching like rubber, claws dripping with dark fluid, its eyes glowing with a sick hunger. Jim, racked with guilt, confessed he'd reported Mike's library trips, making him a target for the scientists. The dawn's vibrancy, its laughter, its chaos, was gone, replaced by screams and the stench of blood. The lab of horrors, facing the truth. The dorm was a graveyard, its halls littered with broken furniture and bloodstains, the air thick with the stench of fear and decay. Mike, Alex, and Jim fought their way to the university's microbiology lab, a sleek fortress of glass and steel that stood in stark contrast to the town's quaint facade. The campus was silent, the fog's retreat leaving a hollow calm, but the hills seemed to watch, their shadows stretching like claws. Inside the lab, the air was cold, smelling of ethanol and something sour, like rotting fruit. Equipment hummed, a centrifuge whirred, monitors flickered with data, but the restricted wing was locked, its door marked with biohazard symbols. They broke in, finding a chamber lined with vats of bubbling liquid, glowing faintly green under fluorescent lights. Files were scattered on a desk, detailing experiments on human behavioral adaptation using engineered microbes. The fog, they learned, was a deliberate release, a cloud of microbial waste designed to test the mutants' behavior in a live environment. The creatures were prisoners, infected with microbes that rewrote their DNA, turning them into grotesque parodies of their former selves, their faces shifting to mimic those the victims trusted. Mike's heart sank, his brother's accident was no isolated tragedy. The same reckless science had birthed this nightmare. Then a figure emerged from the shadows, Dr. Victor Crane, a tall, gaunt man with eyes like ice, his voice calm but laced with menace. Crane was Mike's father's old colleague, the scientist behind Ethan's death. He'd used Eldridge as a testing ground for his microbial weapons, believing humanity needed cleansing through controlled chaos. Ethan's death was collateral damage, a spark for Crane's obsession. Mike was a loose end, his presence a threat. Crane's motive was chilling, to perfect a bioweapon for the highest bidder, a tool to reshape the world in his image. The dorm's life, its laughter, its chaos, was a facade, a cover for his experiments. The final fog, a battle for survival. The lab was a battleground, the air buzzing with the hum of machinery and the stench of microbial decay. Crane unleashed a final wave of fog, thicker and deadlier, the air alive with unseen microbes. Creatures swarmed, their faces shifting, Sam, MIA, even Ethan, his brother's face a grotesque mask, its body a mass of writhing tentacles, eyes weeping pus, its mouth a cavern of jagged teeth. The dorm survivors, Rachel, a few seniors, fought alongside Mike, wielding lab equipment as weapons, their screams mingling with the creature's rasps. Jim, guilt-ridden, fought fiercely, his quiet strength a surprise, but his sketches had been a confession, each creature a mirror of his betrayal. Crane taunted Mike, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Your brother was a sacrifice for progress," he said, his eyes gleaming with fanaticism. Mike, fueled by rage, used his microbiology knowledge to sabotage Crane's equipment, overloading the microbial dispersal system. The lab erupted in flames, the fog clearing in a rush of heat. Jim died shielding Mike, his body torn by a creature's claws, his final words an apology. Alex, gravely wounded, collapsed, his arrogance replaced by a quiet plea for forgiveness. The dorm's life, its laughter, its chaos, was silenced, the survivors scarred, the town exposed as a lie. The aftermath, a haunted survivor. The campus was a ghost town, the fog's retreat exposing a shattered world. Mike stumbled through the dorm's wreckage, his body bruised, his mind a storm of grief and rage. The halls, once alive with laughter and music, were silent, stained with blood, survivors huddled in corners, their eyes hollow. Rachel, her face streaked with tears, helped carry the wounded, her vigil candles now a memorial. Mike found a laptop in the lab's ruins, its files detailing Crane's plans, a global bioweapon, tested on Eldridge's residents. Ethan's death, a decade ago, was a spark for Crane's madness, and Mike was a threat he hadn't anticipated. As he left Eldridge, the hills loomed, their shadows stretching like claws. The town's vibrancy, its students, its chaos, was a lie, a mask over a nightmare. The creatures' faces, Sarah's twisted grin, Ethan's writhing form, haunted him. Mike had survived, but the fog had marked him, turning him into a hunter in a world where science birthed monsters. He carried Ethan's memory, a ghost urging him to expose Crane's legacy, as he stepped into an uncertain dawn. The echoes of Eldridge, a town built on lies. Mike stood on the outskirts of Eldridge, the town silhouette fading into the dawn. The hills, once ominous, seemed to retreat, their secrets exposed. The dawn's vibrant life, its parties, its laughter, had been a fragile illusion, shattered by the fog's truth. Mike's roommates, each a piece of the puzzle, had revealed their ties to the horror, Jim's betrayal, Kyle's rebellion, Alex's complicity. The town's residents, from Sam's carefree juggling to Mia's tearful vigil, had been pawns in Crane's game, their lives expendable. Mike's past, tied to Ethan's death, had led him here, a cruel twist of fate. The university's lab was a smoldering ruin, but its files were Mike's weapon. He'd copied them to a drive, evidence of Crane's bioweapon and the fog's purpose. The creatures, born from human test subjects, were a warning of what science could unleash. Mike's microbiology training had saved him, but it also bound him to this fight. He'd seen the creatures' faces, Sarah's melting grin, Ethan's tentacled horror, and they'd never leave him. Eldridge was a scar, a reminder that normalcy could hide monsters. The ghost of Ethan, a brother's legacy. Mike's journey from Eldridge was a blur, the road stretching through misty hills that seemed to whisper Ethan's name. His brother's death had been no accident, a reckless experiment, a microbe that spiraled out of control, and Crane's cold ambition at its heart. Mike's obsession with microbiology was born from that loss, a need to understand the invisible forces that stole his family. Now, Eldridge had shown him the cost of that obsession. The dorm's life, Rachel's candles, Sam's laughter, Mia's tears, was a fragile facade, torn apart by the fog's monsters. The creatures were Crane's creation, their faces a cruel trick to lure victims. Mike remembered Sarah's warped smile, a claw slashing the air, and Ethan's face on a tentacled horror, its eyes weeping pus. His roommate's secrets, Jim's sketches, Kyle's sabotage, Alex's files, had unraveled the truth, but at a cost. Kyle's death, saving Jim, was a sacrifice Mike couldn't forget. Jim's guilt, Alex's wounds, they were all victims of Crane's madness. Mike's fight wasn't over, the files in his pocket were a promise to Ethan, a vow to stop this horror from spreading. The road ahead, a hunter in the dark. Mike sat in a diner miles from Eldridge, the files spread before him, their words a map of Crane's crimes. The town's normalcy, its coffee shops, its students, had been a lie, a cover for a nightmare. The creatures' faces haunted him, their twisted forms a reminder of science's dark potential. His roommates, each flawed, had been part of the truth, Jim's betrayal, Kyle's rebellion, Alex's complicity. The dorm's life, its parties, its chaos, was gone, replaced by blood and silence. Mike's microbiology knowledge was his weapon, but it was also his burden. Ethan's death had driven him here, and Crane's ambition had nearly destroyed him. The files were a start, but Crane's network was vast, his bioweapon a threat beyond Eldridge. Mike was a survivor, but also a hunter, marked by the fog. He'd exposed the truth, for Ethan, for the dorm's lost souls, for a world unaware of the monsters science could unleash.